Hi gentle people, I'm really excited as time has finally come to reveal the completed diorama Captain Miller Last Stand. I know that some of you guys are following the project since the very beginning. It's a special moment for me. So I hope you like the results and let me know your impressions in the comment section below. Quite a big thing, isn't it? Quite a lot of work on that. Look at this.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard.
Okay, prior to start with this tutorial, I'd like to emphasize the fact that this diorama is not a perfect match with the original movie Saving Private Ryan. I intentionally changed some items either to be a bit closer to the historical reality or for aesthetic reasons. I divided this tutorial into 5 sections that you can find in the description below and access directly according to your needs. Let's start with the painting and pointing procedures. Here you have to consider 3 subsections, the main bridge walls, the cobblestones and the concrete support structures. If you look at the pictures of the original bridge used in the movie, that actually was a fake bridge, you'll see that the color on the outside parts of the bridge is rather dull and monochromatic, and that the inside parts are quite dark. So for aesthetic reasons and to be a little bit closer of the architectural reality of the region, I used some reference pictures of the bridge of Pont-Toubeau. That's a nice natural stone bridge located in between the cities of Caen and Rennes in France. To start with, all the different parts of the bridge have been primed using the black primer produced by AK Interactive, reference AK 11242. This acrylic primer has been thinned with the thinner from this brand. For each part of primer, I diluted with 1.2 to 1.5 parts of thinner. The air pressure was at more or less 2 bars and the airbrush needle was my 0.4 millimeters. Now for the bridge stone specifically, I sprayed 2 layers of a mixture composed of 50% rock grey and 50% white. For each part of paint, again here 1.5 parts of thinner from AK Interactive. And the air pressure is still around 2 bars or 29 psi. After application of these 2 layers with the airbrush, I painted my stones with a paintbrush. This time the paint mixture was 50% grimy grey and 50% white. I then randomly painted some stones, let's say more or less 10 to 15%, with a mixture composed of 45% grimy grey, 45% white and 10% of British khaki. The outlines of the arches and the remaining 10 to 50% of the stones were painted with a much lighter tone. This paint mixture was 80% white and 20% grimy grey. Our base coat is now completed and we are ready to start the second phase of this painting procedure of these bridge stones. This second phase will greatly enrich the color palette of our stones. It's a very crucial step because in the real life, each individual stone may present 1 or sometimes 2 or more different colors. This second step is really easy and quite funny to realize. It will be performed with watercolor pencils. Personally, I use Faber-Castell watercolor pencils. It's an excellent brand of products for arts. And you can see here the range of colors that are used for this second step. So, how to use these pencils? It's quite easy. The first step, you wet the surface with tap water, and the second step, you do some marks with these pencils on a very random manner. You can apply one color or mix 2 or 3 colors on the same stone. What happens is that once the pencil's head enters in contact with water, it releases pigments within this water. With another flat, humid brush, you can then blend these pigments at will on the stone surface. You can apply as much pigment as you want, and if you think that you overdid the effect, you can remove the excess of pigments with water. So it's not a permanent process so long you do not apply any varnish on top of it. The idea here is to work each stone individually with different colors to create a much wider color palette. What is really important here, to be as realistic as possible, is to make sure that there is no color connection from one stone to another. So each individual stone is different from its neighbor. As I just mentioned, this process is not permanent, so it's an advantage and a disadvantage. As to make it permanent, you have to apply a varnish on top of it, just to make sure that during the weathering process and the pointing process, when we will apply all the different products, the pigments won't travel all across the surface or simply disappear. The pointing procedure is rather aggressive, so you will see that even after 2 layers of varnish, we will lose quite a lot of these pigments. Given the size of this bridge, I decided to work with varnish spray can. I used acrylic flat varnish from Valero, and I applied 2 layers of varnish, giving each time 24 hours of curing time between the layers. Let's see now how I painted the cobblestones and the concrete support structures. We'll then see the pointing procedure that was identical for all the different parts of the bridge. The base coat of the cobblestones was 100% done with age-interactive basalt grey, applied with a paintbrush. Again, to enrich the color palette of this area, I used different acrylic references. I give you here the list of these references. To increase the contrast with the warm tones of the bridge stones, I decided to paint my cobblestones in grey bluish gold colors, which fortunately is the most common appearance of cobblestone streets in France. The last section we need to address regarding the painting procedures are the concrete structures on which this bridge is standing. My base coat is applied with a paintbrush and is composed of 75% of pale grey and 25% of grey-green. I wanted to incorporate a subtle greenish aspect due to the humidity generated by the river. As you can see on these images, the bridge isn't fixed yet on its base. This base will be an XPS foam layer of 8 cm thickness. It's very important to plan in advance your painting, pointing and weathering procedures on the bottom side of the bridge, because once attached on its base, this area won't be accessible anymore. I wanted to give a try to some other types of acrylic colors, so I used here the Academy Acryl Color 657 Pebble Grey with the sponge technique. These acrylic colors are a bit cheaper and allows to correct and to blend the colors with water during a longer time. But I must admit that it was more a kind of curiosity than a specific requirement. Then, just like for the rest of the bridge, I worked the concrete structures with our watercolor pencils. Honestly, I really find these tools super adapted for this kind of work. It gives quickly and easily a very realistic appearance to the stone's textures, and you can work with many different colors until you reach the desired appearance. Now, watch out that these tools are really interesting for this type of work, but that doesn't mean that it's adapted for all type of skill modeling application. The very last step prior speaking about the pointing procedure was to spray a little bit of black on the bottom side of this concrete structure, just to create or to simulate a depth effect in our river. Our work so far has been protected with 2 layers of flat varnish. It's now time to start the pointing process and to fill in all the different gaps between our stones. The procedure is quite easy and straightforward. I used a paste designed to repair the walls in your house. You can find that kind of product in any good hardware store. This is a kind of finishing product. It's a very, very thin product, and I mixed it with acrylic paint for almost all the bridge sections. I used the reference Feel Grey base. It's important to use a dark color because this product being white, it will lighten a lot the color of the joints when drying. You can see here a comparison between the left side that has been pointed and the right side which still need to be pointed. The contrast is of course much reduced once pointed, just like when pointed real houses, and you lose quite a lot of pigments. Mixing the acrylic paint with the paste is done visually, so I don't have any specific dilution ratio here. I think it's the best way, as in the reality there might be some light differences between some sections of the construction, as the masons have to do and redo their mortar prior working on different wall sections. So basically I tried to do the same mixture each time, but I didn't count the droplets. So I just poured my paint and mixed it until reaching the desired visual appearance. This mortar is then inserted in the gaps between the stones with a silicone flat brush, and the excess is removed with a piece of cloth previously dipped in soapy water. I also used a humid flat paintbrush to help me removing the mixture from all the little crevices and textures of our stones. For this procedure, it's important to work small section at a time. I worked areas of, let's say, 10 by 10 centimeter or 4 inch by 4 inch, as this product is drying quite fast and it becomes more and more difficult to remove it once dry. Some areas are obviously a little bit less accessible, so again watch out here with your planning. I used the same color reference to point all the different bridges sections, with the only exception of the lower parts of the concrete support structure close to the water line, where I used burnt umber, which is an even darker color to simulate the apparition of ascending humidity. This procedure is rather interesting because you can mix different colors in your paste and create different areas of pointing according to your needs, like a lighter color for an area recently repaired, or any darker color for humid zones, and so on. It's a very easy and flexible process. The product texture is also very thin, as I said, which allows to enter all the gaps between the stones, even the thinnest gaps, which is not always the case with sand and gravels. The cobblestones were also pointed with the same mixture and with the same color reference as the bridge stones, so the field grey base. Sandbags, ta-da! I've had many questions from you on the social networks about how I did these sandbags, and here come all my secrets. I've tried quite a lot of different products to do these sandbags. I've started with modeling clay, I even tried epoxy putty 2 components. Some products were too flexible, others were too difficult to use, and others were far too expensive, especially given the numbers of bags I had to realize. The products I felt more comfortable with was Super Sculpey Firm. We have a winner. So, what is this product? Basically, it's a polymer clay, a kind of plastic clay. This product has 3 huge advantages on its competitors. First one, the price. I know many modelers use the epoxy putty 2 components to do that kind of work, but I can guarantee you that when you have hundreds of bags to do, the price difference is quite significant. The second huge advantage is that it doesn't dry, doesn't harden when in contact with air. So basically, what does that mean? It means that you have plenty of time to work this material until you reach the correct aspect. There is no time pressure, just like when you are working with the two-component epoxy putty. You know that within an hour or so, your product will be dry and rock hard, and what's left on the workbench is for the dustbin. So here it's not the case. So just to give you an idea, on this bridge there is the equivalent of plus minus 400 grams of polymer clay just for the sandbags. The third advantage, last but not least, there is only one component, so there is no mixing required with other product. How does it work? It's quite easy. All you need to do is to knead the paste. You have to work this clay a little bit to make it a bit warmer and more flexible. And in this particular case, create little balls of, let's say, 1 centimeter diameter. No need to measure. It's like in the real world. It's approximative. All bags are different according to the amount of sand inside of them, right? And we try afterwards to give those balls a bag appearance. What I did then was to create a hole on top of each bag that needed to receive a knot, and I then sculpted the different folds and seams around the bags. I concentrated the folds around the knot location, and for this you can use any kind of metallic tool or silicone brushes with different sizes to create the different volumes. Another advantage of this polymer clay compared to other products, just like the epoxy putty 2 component, to mention it, is that this clay is much less sticky. It's much easier to work with and to sculpt than other products, to my opinion. Each time one bag is done, you can stack it with the other ones to form your fortification. Within these walls, you can also incorporate, just like here, some empty wooden crates, and you can also modify the shape of your bags to create more variation and give more visual interest to your creation, just like folding bags, torn bags, empty bags, and so on. Because this clay remains flexible, you can also give this fortification the shape of the train. With this clay, this is also possible to create tarps, but I must admit that it's a bit easier with the epoxy putty 2 component. Torn bags gives you the opportunity to show the sand that flows out of the bag. As you can see now, the only thing missing are the knots and a few seams on the bottom of the bags. For these items, I use the Tamiya epoxy putty quick type. For the knots, I created carrots to which I gave the right shape using a metallic scriber, as you can see on these images. It's rather easy and quick to do. Now, given the number of bags, obviously it was best not to create a knot for each bag, so you have to position these bags strategically to limit their apparition. The same happens with the seams at the bottom of the bags. These seams are done by creating very thin sausages. This step is a bit more challenging. Great! We now have bags with knots and seams, so the work is almost done. The only issue is that all this is still soft and it won't harden, staying exposed to the air. To turn these bags rock hard, what we need to do is to cook them. We will remove our creation with caution and put it in the oven for approximately 35 to 45 minutes at a temperature of 130 degrees Celsius or 266 degrees Fahrenheit. After cooking, the meal is ready. Here are our beautiful bags, rock hard, and they kept their original shape so that we can reinstall them at their original precise location. Small remark here, you can put the knots and the seams either before cooking them or after cooking. I tried both methods and they both worked fine. The last touch on these bags prior painting was to give those bags a kind of cloth texture. And for this, I used a modeling paste, acrylex, that I applied with an old paintbrush. I found this method much easier and quicker than trying to print out texture by making pressure with a piece of cloth or bandage on the soft bags prior to cook them, as this method could modify the shape and ruin the sculpting job done so far. Moreover, this texture can be easily applied everywhere with the paintbrush. Here is the result at the end of the painting and weathering procedure on these sandbags. Given the numbers and the scale, I'm rather pleased with the results. It was quite a big challenge to make so many bags, but it was a very important image of this movie. Quickly, a few words on the Tramway tracks painting process. My base coat is composed of 80% hull red and 20% black. These dark colors already gives a light corroded aspect to these tracks. I then applied an acrylic wash making use of dark rust, highly diluted with water, in the gutter of the tracks. The lateral sides of these tracks remained underground for a long period of time, so it was necessary to emphasize the corroded aspect at these locations. I started with a mix of leather brown and dark rust. The fixing plates were also painted that way. The lower we go on the tracks, the more rust there is, so the bottom side will receive pure dark rust diluted with water before applying orange brown, also very diluted, very translucent. And I applied this mixture at key locations. For the upper part of the tracks, I used this paint, steel, true metal from AK Interactive. These parts that were in contact with the tramway wheels, I must admit that this paint looked strange to me at the very beginning when applying it, but the result at the end is beautiful. So you just have to apply it with a paintbrush, and after, let's say, more or less 30 minutes, when it's dry to the touch, you can rub it with a cotton swab to polish it and make it shine. I really like the result. It's just like real polished steel, you know. The effect is perfect to my opinion. I finished the work on these tramway tracks by adding a little bit of hull red pure with the sponge technique, just to create the apparition of rust on these tracks, as they were probably not used since a lot of time. I also applied a little wash of dark rust and orange brown on the track's sleepers. Well, another important aspect of this diorama was the river, as from the beginning I intended to reproduce a kind of 3D depth effect with the presence of underwater rubble. So I first created the riverbed with sand and gravel fixed with PVA glue, and I used my Proxon hot wire machine to create bigger stones. These blocks fallen in the water after the bridge partial destruction. These underwater rubbles have been mixed with some bigger pebbles, and I gave texture to my foam blocks with this homemade tool. Just like sand and gravel, I fixed everything with PVA glue diluted with water. To create the depth illusion, I painted the whole riverbed with AK black primer. The initial idea was not to be able to see the riverbed once the resin was poured. The underwater rubble area was also primed in black, and I then painted the big blocks with the same paint mixture, 50% grimy gray, 50% white, as the other stones on the lateral sides of the bridge. That was a real rough painting. Once done, I gave a rough dry brush with the same color on all the pebbles edges, in between the big blocks, and I apply a dark brown wash done with acrylic color, burnt umber, diluted with water on all that area. Once dry, I completed the work on that zone, applying another dry brush on the big block's edges, and I sprayed some more black around the underwater rubble area, and the base of the lowest stones to reinforce the depth effect. So the idea is just to be able to see the biggest blocks close to the surface, and as we move deeper into the river, the blocks are less and less visible. It's now time to pour our resin into our polycarbonate aquarium. Small moment of stress here. I made use of the outstanding epoxy resin proposed by Artline. It was the crystal line because they have different products. If you are looking for top quality epoxy resin, you can benefit a 10% discount with my code LAB on all the Artline products. You can access their website with the link provided in the description below. To color this epoxy resin, I also use their excellent pigment pastes. I use black, yellow and red to create my hue. Add your pigment paste progressively and stir for at least 5 to 10 minutes. To increase the depth effect, I decided to pour 2 layers of epoxy resin, having different opacity and brightness. So the first layer at more or less 1 centimeter thickness, it was really dark and almost opaque to hide the bottom of the riverbed. Once happy with the result, you can pour this resin into your aquarium. I try to work as smoothly as possible in order not to introduce too many air bubbles. The polycarbonate sheets are 2 mm thick and have been glued with PVA glue and hot glue. This epoxy resin is odorless, and because of its low viscosity, it also permits the air bubbles to escape rapidly. After this first layer, I had some air bubbles to remove with a little torch. It's completely normal. These bubbles were not coming from the resin, but from the riverbed texture, so the sand and the gravels in which some air bubbles were trapped. You will see that with the second layer, we'll have virtually no air bubbles. I let this first layer cure during 24 hours prior to pour the second layers, and as I explained, this second layer had the same hue but was much more transparent. That was to reinforce the 3D depth effect. Fortunately, my aquarium didn't suffer any leaks, so this process happened very well, very smoothly. I was super happy with the resin quality, so I really advise you, if you are interested in top quality resin, to check the Artline products. As you can see here, directly after having poured this second layer, there is almost no air bubbles in the mixture, so that's really a fantastic product. Transparency is also top-notch. There is no single strange cloud inside of the product, and as you can see, both layers blended very, very nicely, so there is no visible separation between both layers. Again here, 24 hours later, it was time to remove my polycarbonate sheets. It was a hell of a fight because these sheets were really sticking to the resin. It was not an issue to remove the hot glue, but really the polycarbonate sheets were sticking to the resin block. I then removed the resin lip on the edges with a sharp hobby knife. That was the first step to finish this river, and then I applied Mod Podge gloss to create the little water ripples on the river surface. Now, to be really honest, I was disappointed by this product, or at least by the result with this product. The fact is that it's really easy to apply, and you can create the ripples with an airbrush, just blowing air on this product. The transparency is also excellent after drying. The issue I met was that once dry, a lot of air bubbles were trapped within this glue, this product. It wasn't possible to detect these bubbles when the product was still wet and white. So it's only after curing, when becoming transparent, that I discovered all these bubbles with the hope that they will disappear, but it was too late to remove them, and actually they just remain visible. In the end, it's not dramatic, it's just that the global appearance of my river is a little bit more turbulent than it was planned initially. I finally add a bit of snow sprinkles from Make Interactive around the biggest blocks, and downstream of the concrete pillars to create the foam generated by the water current. I'm globally super happy about the resin work and aspect. The 3D effect rendering was really what I wanted as from the beginning, with this little disappointment at the end with the water ripples. But okay, it's acceptable to my opinion. To complete this tutorial movie, I'll have a few words about the weathering procedures and of course all these rubbles present on top of the bridge. To make it short, because we can speak hours only about weathering, let's say that I made extensive use of natural materials like sand, pebbles, earth, gravel that I found in the public garden in front of my house. I have several boxes with different grain size and different colors, but I also added some cobblestones that I built myself with my homemade tools, as explained in the video related to the cobblestones creation, and different little bricks that I realized with green stuff word silicone molds. You can find these video tutorials on the channel. To keep things easy and quick, let's say that I randomly scatter these gravel stones, cobblestones on the bridge, and I further glue them in position with PVA glue. To better integrate all these rubble within the scenery, it was necessary to glue all the sandbags in position prior to spread these rubble on top of the bridge. What I'd like to emphasize to speak about these rubbles is that prior to glue them, I always spread a little bit of isopropylic alcohol diluted with water just prior to apply the PVA glue. It facilitates the capillarity effect with the glue, as you can see on these images. It was also necessary to pre-position the sandbags located below the Tiger One prior to scatter the rubble all around the place. Planning is really essential if you really want to integrate all the different elements of your diorama correctly. As you can see, I didn't use pigments until that step. I preferred to separate this pigment application to control better the final visual appearance. So I let first the gravels and rubbles cure prior using the pigments. I then applied many different pigments references, including concrete, industrial city dirt, Middle East soil, brick dust, black smoke, clay soil, ashes white, and I fixed these pigments with the Migamo pigment fixers. Watch out anyway here with this product to fix the pigment. Have a check with your foam prior to apply it in order to prevent accidents and see your XPS foam melting after application. As you can see, with a nice combination of gravel selection but also pigment selection, it wasn't necessary to go through any painting procedure on these rubbers. All these colors are blending with each other on a very natural way. Well, that's it, my dear friends. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I could have addressed many other items specifically, but I really wanted to keep this movie within reasonable time limits. If you have any question regarding whatever subject on this diorama, please feel free to contact me personally, to send me a message, or you can even drop your question in the comment section below. It could interest all the community. The next project is already on its way. In the next challenge, we will see how to realize extensive structural damage on an aircraft, how to realize epoxy resin deep pour, and finally how to sculpt sharks with polymer clay. I really hope to see you again for this exciting new adventure. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and to hit the bell to help me grow this channel. Thanks for watching and greetings from Portugal. Ciao ciao.